I'm really pumped for the men's field for a number of reasons. One, Bekele in New York City. When Bekele was dominant on the track, I wasn't a big fan. I was a Haile fan. Bekele, I took the luster away from Haile. And I met an Ethiopian journalist. He's like, I don't like Bekele either. He's kind of arrogant. He was just so talented. But now I am a huge Bekele fan. I've always thought somebody who's great at world cross is the greatest cross-country runner ever, would excel in New York. And this is keeping him in the game. He's motivated. He ran pretty well in Berlin a few weeks ago. So what can he do? But there's question marks about him. We got the silver medalists coming back from the Olympics. So both of them are running their second marathon in a number of weeks. They could be off their game. Then all you've got really is Candier as a super stud. World half marathon record holder debut. That's pretty cool. So there's some cool storylines there that really appeal to me.
Yeah, and one other guy worth noting is Albert Courier. His PR is only 2:08:03, but he was second in New York in 2019. So I think he's a potential winner. But then you look at the rest of the elite list. I mean, you've got Gourmet Gebrezlassi. He was the 2016 champ in New York, but he's kind of fallen off the face of the earth. Like, he hasn't really done a ton since then. So I'm not confident you're going to get anything from him. And then after that, the fourth seed is Eob Fanyel. Has anyone ever heard of that guy before? He runs for Italy. He was 20th at the Olympics, so he's coming back. And then after that, Albert Courier, and then you get to Noah Droddy, 2:09:09. So I don't know. I don't trust Bekele, to be honest. Like, he's running his second marathon in 6 weeks. This is a guy who famously drops out of a lot of races, has struggled to stay healthy. Now, he did run 2:06 in Berlin. That's a decent showing, but I'm not confident he's going to be able to bounce back and finish this race or do anything great 6 weeks later. And like you said, Robert, I think Abdi Nagaye, I feel bouncing back from the Olympics. I mean, we just saw his training partner, Bashir Abdi, ran 2:03 in Rotterdam last weekend. And he was Bashir was the bronze medalist and Abdi was the silver medalist. So I feel pretty confident about his ability to bounce back. I think it's probably him, Courier, or Candier as the guys I'd be looking at.
It's crazy. This men's field really is weak. I mean, I'm excited about it, but we've had some of these issues with some of the other marathons this fall. If a couple of the favorites falter, it may not be that impressive a race. But if we can just get a B Bekele, if Candier is actually a marathoner, we just need a couple guys, but there's just not depth. Like, I'm kind of shocked New York just doesn't go invite a couple 2:06 guys. I don't know. New York likes to sort of craft the storylines. 2:06 isn't even that fast. Excuse me. A bunch of like 2:04 guys. But man, I'm just kind of crazy looking at this field. When you look at the PRs on the list, John, it's just sort of shocking to see number 3 at 2:07 in the modern era. Now, you have Candier, you have Mekinen, who's a 60 flat half marathoner, but that's not even that great these days, making his debut. It's kind of crazy. Yet I'm still very excited about this race. But I think that's one good thing we do is we show those tables, and the numbers don't lie. This race is not that deep, and there's probably a lot of there's always the question marks with Kenny B, right, when he runs the marathon. The good thing for me, actually, is that he ran Berlin not last month, 2 months ago now, because he's kind of had a problem. He's older with his training, but that shows he was fit then. And I'm like, okay, well, give him a couple of weeks rest, have him come back, and let him take his chances. I would be more worried about this race if he hadn't run that, actually, which is crazy.
No, I agree with you, because yes, he's got 26 miles of hard running in his legs, but he actually got through it in one piece. And you got the super shoes, which makes it easier to recover between races. I mean, we saw Galen Rupp. He got 8th at the Olympics, and then 8 or 9 weeks later, he gets second in Chicago. Ruth Chepengedich dropped out of the Olympics. She wins Chicago. I mean, 6 weeks, that's a tight turnaround. I think I'm a little bit more concerned about Bekele than you are, Weldon, but I do agree, I think finishing that race is a good sign for him. The other thing that I think is interesting, I mean, we talked about Candier and his potential for the win. we saw this very similar storyline play out 2 years ago with Jocelyn Jepkosgei in the women's race in New York. She was the half marathon world record holder, just like Kibawat Kandier. She makes her debut in New York, just like Kibawat Kandier, and she wins the race. She takes down Mary Katani, the legend in New York, and now she's firmly established herself as one of the best marathoners in the world. She won London. So we've seen it happen fairly recently, and I think I was talking to Kandier's agent, Johnny Demadonna, a couple days ago about, why do you choose New York for a debut? And he pointed out, well, the thing that they liked about it is that there weren't pacemakers. He thought if you're just throwing him into a race where it's going to be 203, 204 straight away, which ironically, none of the majors, other than London, have been like that this fall. They've been a little bit on the slower side. But he's like, look, if it's like that, it's hard to ask a guy in his debut to go out and run that fast, which you can take issue with that line of thinking maybe. But he basically is like, New York, I think it's probably not going to go out super fast for the first half. And then if you can sort of just make it into a shorter race, like look at Benson Kipruto. He made a huge move, with about 35K, and that's kind of what won him the race in Boston a few weeks ago. And Johnny was basically saying, if you can do the same sort of thing and you make it just like a really fast second half, that helps a guy who's coming from the half marathon as opposed to going from the gun. That was the line of thinking, at least. And the other interesting thing he told me, now I know you guys get mad at me for burying the lead, so I'm going to come out and say this, and it'll also be in our preview article that I write. He admitted that Kanye's not 100% healthy. He's had a knee issue dating back to the Kenyan Cross Country Championships back in February. That's why he didn't run the Kenyan Olympic trials on the track. He wanted to run the 10,000, but he wasn't ready to run. He got back to training in July, but he said, look, he's had pain during this build-up. He thinks he's pretty fit. He ran 26:53 or so on the roads in a 10K a few weeks ago, so clearly he's in shape. But he said after this race, we're going to have to evaluate and see what we do because, his knee has still been bothering him.
So lots of question marks about these top male contenders. The question I have is, what will this mean for Kenenisa Bekele's reputation if he wins this race going forward? Already the greatest world cross-country runner in history, arguably the greatest track runner in history. If he wins this, does this solidify him as the GOAT, the greatest of all time? He will increase his World Marathon Majors victory total by 50%. He's only won 2 majors. I don't know if only is the right word for that, but it's not that many. He's won Berlin twice, both in super fast times. He's missed the world record when he won those 2 races by a combined 6 seconds. I think he missed it by 4 seconds in 2016 and 2 seconds in that 2:01:41 race. So pretty amazing. So I definitely think this will help him sort of, in the debates for the years to come as to, can someone surpass him as the greatest of all time if he wins here today?
Technically it helps him, but I don't know. I already view him as the greatest of all time. I don't see his winning New York is cool. I think it's a cool achievement at the age of 39, coming back again. This is a guy 2 years basically passed since his last good marathon that he comes out of the woodwork again and to win a major at 39 in New York on a tough course. Yeah, it's a cool achievement, but I don't see this changing his legacy all that much. Kipchoge is the greatest marathon ever, and Bekele's never going to get that title from him. Though I guess one thing, this will be interesting. Robert, you want to see Kipchoge win all the majors. And the one thing you've said is that he's never won on sort of a hilly technical course like Boston or New York. If Bekele wins New York, and let's say Kipchoge shows up and tries to run New York next year and fails, does that change your thinking vis-a-vis, those 2 guys in the marathon?
A little bit. That's why I think it'd be great. What if Bekele throws down, what is it, Fifth Avenue or whatever it's called? Throws down an epic performance. The New York City, the U.S. gets to see the world's greatest runner winning with an epic slap down of the field over the last 10K. And then if he wins, he's much more likely to come back next year as the defending champion. Could Kipchoge come to New York next year? I bet he likely does London in the fall, unfortunately, but it would be really cool to see them clash here in New York and I think that would motivate Bekele, because my biggest concern about Bekele moving forward is the motivation. Like, he's obsessed with getting that world record, but he's probably never going to get it. I want to see him come back to New York. I want to see him do Boston. I want to see these guys on the American courses. I'm biased for sure, but I want to see them in the non-rabbited races. I know what they can do in rabbited races.
No, Robert, I agree. I think it's great to have Bekele running in the United States. He ran Chicago in 2014, and then he's mostly been in Europe and Dubai for the rest of the marathon since then. But your scenario you just suggested, that's what I think I want Bekele to win, because if Bekele wins, and Kipchoge has said he wants to win all 6 majors, I really don't see what he has to gain by going back to London next year. I know he likes running London, but if he says he wants to run all the majors, he needs to go to New York next fall. And if Bekele is the defending champion, they're going to want him to come back. And that would just be a prize fight right there. We would hype it up again. Kipchoge would probably win again, because that's always what he does. But one loss Kipchoge, Bekele battle, New York City 2022. Oh, that'd be amazing. So I want that scenario to come to fruition.
All this Bekele talk got me thinking of Haile Gebrezlassi. John takes it for granted that Bekele is the GOAT. I don't know. Maybe we'll discuss that a bit. But it reminded me, I was there when Haile G retired. This was in 2010. I had to look up the year. He dropped out of the race, came into the press room, and just on the whim said he's retiring. Took it back, like all the greats do. You're not a great athlete in individual sport unless you retire and then unretire. It shows you got the ego necessarily to be the best. So, and then I was looking it up. I'm like, wait, he did some good stuff after that. And actually, he didn't. This is 2010. He then came back 2011, DNF'd in Berlin. 2012, he ran 2:08 in Tokyo for 4th. And then DNF'd in Fukuoka in 2012. I think he then finally retired in 2015. But, John, I'm seeing here in Wikipedia, Haile G has 2 marathon world records. I don't think Kenneth Bekele has any. Broke the world record twice. The great Haile Gebrezlassi.
That's true. And how many world cross-country titles does Haile Gebrezlassi have?
How many times did he run it, John?
At least once.
Fair point. Fair point.
Like Bekele ran significantly faster than Gebrezlassi ever did in the marathon. Granted, he has super shoes, but
also as a former New York resident. Oh, by the way, the state of New York. I didn't live in New York last year. Can I get my damn tax refund back? Like, I sent you all the documentation, and they said it can take 120 days. I want that money now. Like, you're stealing my money. Someone check into this, please. Thank you.
Wow, well done with the drive-by on the New York IRS. But I'm curious.
Robert said 5th Avenue. You run up 1st Avenue in New York. I feel like people who live in like Iowa know that. No offense, Eric, web guy who lives in Iowa, but it's 1st Ave. The 5th Avenue mile is a different race, Robert.
I knew it didn't sound right, but that's why I kind of tried to pause. Normally John hops in there and says it.
I didn't hear a pause. I was ready to correct you there, and I didn't hear a pause. So sorry, Robert.
Well, it's good to know, folks. It's true. Welton doesn't live in New York City, nor does the new mayor of New York City. So it's all fun and games. John, congratulations, though, in Boston. Well, I guess you no longer live in Boston. You live in a suburb of Boston. Folks, for the first time in history, Boston has elected not a white male as the mayor. So the liberals are finally living up to their values a little bit in Boston. I always like to make fun of Boston for being the most racist city in the country. But anyways.
You like doing that? That's fun for you, Robert?
Well, I don't like to be preached upon from the Northeast elite. And then I'm like, Boston, why don't you get your house in order? So it's good to see that you're getting your house in order.
You don't think you're part of the Northeast elite, Robert?
No, John. I'm Baltimore. We're a southern, northeastern, middle Atlantic town. Anyways, we'll talk politics on the Friday 15. Not really. All right, earlier in the show intro, I talked a little bit, kind of half jokingly, about how Ben True is going to make you proud, become the first Dartmouth alum to win the New York City Marathon. It is going to be his debut. Going to try to overcome his disappointment of not making the Olympics again. He's got to be one of the fastest Americans never to make an Olympic team. But if he wins New York, everybody, that will be forgiven. But he's not the only American in this race. There's 2 guys with sub 210 PBs, 2 more with sub 212. And then I think 4 total after that, under 2:14. Noah Droddy leads the list in terms of guys who have run a marathon a marathon before at 2:09:09. Olympian Jared Ward, 2:09:25 is in there. Nathan Martin, the unheralded guy, 2:11:05 for 9th in the Marathon Project last year. Elkanah Kibet, 2:11:31. Shadrach Biwak, Kevin Lewis, Brian Schroeder, and Jon Renary all have broken 2:14 as well. Of these guys, we'll probably try to talk to some of them tomorrow, but what do we know? What can we expect from them?
So what the interesting thing about this is two of the most intriguing guys. So you got the fastest guy in the field and then the most intriguing debut in terms of Americans, Noah Droddy and Ben True. Neither of them have sponsors as of this moment, which is pretty interesting, I would say. 2:09:09 guy, and then Ben True, obviously, 4th at the Olympic trials. But I don't know what to expect. I mean, Noah Droddy, so he started working a full-time job. I talked to him yesterday, and he said his training's been going pretty well, but he's now a warehouse manager out in Colorado for SOS Hydration. And so, he's on his feet a little bit, but he's basically said it took me a little bit to get into the rhythm of running before work, then working, and then, working out again in the afternoon after he's done with work. But, he's never done a build-up like this. He's always been a sponsored pro for his marathons. So that's a little interesting for him. I haven't really talked to any of the other Americans about their training or anything. I am interested. I mean, Jared Ward, he's been the top American in New York City the last 2 times this race was held. In 2018 and 2019, he was 6th in both of them. But since then, he hasn't really done much. The Olympic trials, he was only 27th. Then he was 17th in London last fall, and he was 35th at the Marathon Project in 2:16. So I'm kind of curious to see what's up with him. We know he's got the talent, but the last year has not been very well. He was only 16th at the US 20K championships back in September. So can he get back on a course where he's had success in the past? And then these other guys, I mean, I assume one of them will run well, but if you look at like Nathan Martin and Kevin Lewis, they're both guys who ran PBs at the Marathon Project, but they're not really household names or anything like that. Elkanah Kibet and Shadrach Biwak. Shadrach Biwak's had success in New York as well. He's been top 10 3 times, but he hasn't run a good marathon in 3 years. And then one guy I'm interested in is Brian Schroeder, because if you remember last year, he's the guy who led the first half of the Olympic marathon trials. He got that big lead, and he ended up dropping out, but the fact he was confident that he could run, I think around 2:09 on that course, he went for it. So if he has that kind of belief, I'm just kind of interested to see what he can do in this race as well. And then Jon Renary, he's been training pretty well in Flagstaff. I remember last year he did the treadmill half marathon world record, and he ran it in Flagstaff or something like that. I don't know what his training's been like for that build up. So yeah, what I'm saying, Robert, is this is a pretty wide open race for Tough American. Like Ben True, if his build-ups goes well, like Ray Tracy told me his build-up's been going well. He's very pleased with how he's adapted to it. He thinks it's been good for his body because the track training was really beating him up. Remember, Ben's 35 years old at this point. So he actually thinks he's been able to stay in one piece better with marathon training than track training. But again, it's his debut.
It's going to be really interesting. Some of these guys, you talked about Brian Schroeder, but he was only 12th at New Haven 20K. Why would I expect anything from him? Jared Ward, if he doesn't run well, are we sticking a fork in him? I mean, to be honest, seriously, what has he done that's really significant? But if Ben True is the top American, really runs well as top 3 or 4 in this thing, it's going to make me wonder, has he been in the wrong event the wrong time? I mean, I never viewed him sort of as a guy that was better the longer he got, but maybe he has. He never liked the 10K on the track. It was boring to him, but he was pretty good at it. But this is a guy that's been training alone for much of his career. The grind of the marathon is not, if he's not in a pack, I don't think it's going to bother him. He's used to that. So it really would be interesting if this is his event. If he does really well, I'm going to think, wow, he should have been running the marathon the entire time, his entire career.
I'm not going to think that. I mean, this is a guy who was 6th in the world in the 5,000 meters in 2015. He's made multiple U.S. World Championship teams. Okay, he didn't win a U.S. title on the track, but he's never going to be close to 6th in the world in the marathon. So, look, his best event was the 5K. he happened to coincide in a pretty strong era for the United States in the 5K. Guys like Bernard Lagat, Galen Rupp, Paul Chalimo. But I don't think we're going to be like, oh my God, he should have been in the marathon the whole time. He had a very good long career in the 5,000 meters and was one of the best in the world.
But never an Olympian.
Okay. Is he going to be an Olympian in the marathon, Robert?
John, I'm not sure if he would have been an Olympian in the marathon. And I feel a little bad for bringing that up, but that's just kind of how that Joe Public judges runners. But it's so arbitrary. I mean, I doubt Ben True, as a Mainer, guy that lives up in the Northeast, was a Donald Trump supporter, but I mean, I only say that because of the immigration laws, in the sense of Ben True would have been an Olympian like 30 years ago, before all these runners that were born in Africa became U.S. citizens. I mean, 2016, he's fifth, but look who beat him. And the top three were all born in Africa: Bernard Lagat, Hassan Mead, Paul Chalimo. And America is the land of immigrants. Don't misunderstand me, but I'm just saying, like, with our immigration policies in the 1960s, Ben True certainly would have been an Olympian. So it's a unfortunate way we're judged. Runners are judged, but I had to bring it up.
So what do you expect? Do you think he'll be a good marathoner?
I didn't until you told me that the coach thought he was going to run between 208 and 210. So it's got me more interested.
I mean, immigration policies, there's just ebbs and flows with talent. When someone's Olympian, when there's not. You can't, I mean, everything isn't done in a perfect environment. Ben True's not an Olympian. He's not going to be an Olympian. I'll get it out there. This race, a good run with this field, you better be top three, I think, in my book. And as we're talking about this field, I think there's some chances for the Americans to do well because there's not a lot of depth. But if guys who are totally unsponsored are in the top three at New York City, is that an indication of how well they ran? You're not going to be able to get top three unless you run well, right? I mean, there's just no way around it. Because there's, like some guy, like the guy who was 11th place at the Olympics is in this field. He's better than Noah Andrade.
Right. Well, I think it's also an indication, like Nell Rojas she was sixth in Boston. She's unsponsored.
Right. And is that a life earth-shattering run? I don't think so.
No, it's a good run. I think getting third still, you're still going to have to run a very, very good race to finish on the podium as an American here. What I do think is interesting, though, is Robert said earlier, Noah Andrade, he wanted to run the Worlds, and then USATF comes out with this criteria saying, actually, we're basing it off of full marathon results and not off of the descending order list, which he would have made it in off of. But there is still a chance for an American to get on that team, because right now, the two guys on the team behind Galen Rupp are Colin Mickow, who was sixth in Chicago, and Colin Benny, who was seventh in Boston. So if an American finishes sixth in this race, they would bump Colin Benny off. And I think it's very possible, given the lack of total studs near the top of the race, to have an American finish sixth place, and that would put them in the driver's seat for one of those World Championship marathon spots. So Noah Andrade, talking to him, that's still something he wants to do. He wants to finish. If he's top American, he has a good chance to be in the top six, and that will put him on the team.
Interesting points. I mean, it gets back, though, to the whole thing of how ridiculous is it that USATF announces the qualification system saying that only 3 races are going to count. By the way, 2 of the races are already over. There's nothing you can do about it. It just doesn't make any sense at all. It's like they don't want to acknowledge the fact that runners like to try to qualify, know what's available to them when they qualify, instead of, it sounds like they just want to pick these runners based on these arbitrary criteria. And it's not easy when you don't have a trials race. I get it. Have you guys seen the Japanese system that's come out? It's like multiple pages long. And what they're doing is kind of using a system. They've kind of created their own marathon ranking, whereas you get points. It's kind of like a combination of the World Athletics track rankings, but for the marathon. You get points based on how fast you run, like on a scoring table, but then you get bonus points if it's for how high you place, and you get more points if you're running in the Japanese races. It's literally like a 20-page document to how they're going to pick their World Championship team. But I don't really care how you pick the team. Well, I do, but the most important thing to me is announce it on day one of the qualifying process. You don't announce it when 2/3 of the races are over and we're 60% through the qualifying window. So John wrote an article about that on the website. If you haven't seen it, it's just unacceptable. In my opinion, that went on there.
Okay, with this World Championship qualifying, New York's going to be slower, probably. So you need to finish 6th. I think there's a decent chance an American could finish 6th. But I don't know. When you look at it, times aren't everything. No Andrade. I guess Marathon Project, it's super fast, but you kind of almost have to adjust for that course. Jared Ward has the pedigree, but is he way past his prime? You guys are talking about Brian Schroeder because he ran the first half of the Olympic trials. Like, that doesn't really mean anything to me. Ben True obviously has the pedigree. A cool story would be Nathan Martin. He's the fastest African-American black American marathoner ever. But that's 2:11:05.
American born, right? I mean, because obviously Abdi and Meb are faster than him.
Fair point, John. Fair point. African American. I guess that term's out, right? Because
and Canucci. I forgot the American record holder is African American as well.
3 years ago, I think I sometimes would use the word black, and I was called a racist, and now that's gone. And African American in the running sense is so wrong because Meb, Canucci, and Legat, they are like legit African American, right? Like born in Africa and live in America. So at least that term can mean what it makes more sense to mean. But Nathan Martin, the fastest black-born American marathoner, and the race for the first time ever has a black race director, Ted Metellus.
He's not the fastest black-born American marathoner. Meb and Bernard Lagat were all black-born. You mean American-born black marathoner? For the record, correction there.
Robert with issuing a rare correction. Usually he's the one he's the correctee, not the corrector.
2:11:05. I guess it's almost 2:10. It's crazy how you can put so much emphasis on the time they run. But John, you were telling this off the line. Akira Tomoyasu, a name we have not mentioned on this broadcast, I don't think. He's got a 2:10:29 PB. That's the 9th fastest in the field. And he finished in what place in that race, John?
So, yeah, it's funny. I saw him like, 2:10 from Japan. All right. I mean, he's not one of Japan's best guys, but that's solid. And I look up, where did he run his 2:10:29? He ran it earlier this year at the Lake Biwa Marathon. He finished in 46th place. Can you imagine running 2:10 and finishing 46th? It's just, I forgot how insanely deep that race was.
And that just sort of shows, like, we're talking about Nathan Martin. He ran an American-only race. I mean, there's a couple, I guess, Canadians, right, last year. He gets 9th in that. And now we're talking about doing well in the New York City Marathon? No, it shouldn't happen. So, that's all I got to say about the men.
My final thought, Augustine Shogue, he's making his quote-unquote debut for it seems like the 4th or 5th time at this point. He's a 1:44.800 guy. He won one of the greatest races of all time, the 2006 Commonwealth Games 5,000 over Craig Mottram. And, it'd be kind of cool to see what a 1:44 guy, he's run 59:32 and a half. I really thought, he might be able to do something, but I think he's either dropped out or withdrawn from like 2 or 3 debuts at this point. So I'm not really holding my breath on him, but kind of interesting. He's a guy who's trained with both Rudisha and Kipchoge during his career. But other than that, I think we can move on to the women's field.